What if the most powerful leadership skill isn't strategy, it isn't vision, and it isn't charisma? What if it's the courage to heal yourself first? Today, you're sitting at the feet of a master who survived 4 near-death experiences in 2 years and turned that fire into a global mission to transform how leaders lead. This conversation will challenge everything you think you know about strength, power, and what it really means to walk in victory.
Now available. Awakening I Am, Internal Awareness in an AI Age audiobook, and our Victory Builders platform, which integrated system for founders who execute, is open. Links in the description.
What?
Now more than ever, we need leaders that are conscious, that are leading from within, and not caught up in the divisiveness that is going around us from other leaders. When I was coming up, the world was large. So something that happened in Russia, I was coming up during what they had called the Cold War. We didn't get that information immediately. It probably took us a few days or Sunday nights or 60 minutes. It was centralized. And we trusted those in leadership to lead. Now, everything in the world is so small, the context is so fast, and everyone is coming from their own divisive perspective at times, that we need to have conversations centered around what does it look to be a leader that is tearing down division and pushing altruism at its highest peak, even in the yoga world, where our yoga is better than your yoga, the church world, our set of rules in church is better than your set of rules in church. We have all of these things that we have to process. And if we're going to lead with value, we have to distinguish what does that mean. The value proposition is, who am I and what am I bringing to the table? Not my product, not my good, not my service. Although sometimes my product, good, and service may be my skill set. But more than that, my invisible brand. How do I make people feel when they're done a session with me? How do I feel? Am I doing it just for money? Am I doing it consciously for positioning? Am I doing it for whatever the reason is? The last thing that should be considered is, am I doing it out of love? My name is NaRon Tillman. This is another episode of Walk in Victory, where we sit you at the feet of the masters and we have conversations that is geared towards helping you develop a better mindset. Our master today is Miss Roxanne. How are you? How are you doing today? You muted.
Muted. Can you hear me now? Can you?
There you go.
Yeah, it
Yes.
wasn't muted, but for some reason, I don't know what's going on today. Computers are taking over the world.
So, so tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of the embodiment of my work when I first, had a multitude of deep awakenings through, simultaneous near-death experiences. A lot of that was coming into the conscious community and speaking about consciousness and how do we lead from consciousness? How do we lead from love? And how do we, be the change that we really want to see in the world? And that work has just naturally been embodied. And it's led me on this beautiful path. I worked as an executive in leadership capacities a lot of my life. And this last 10 years has been a little bit more heightened in that. But now, my focus has really been working with global impact makers and leaders that are operating at depth and at consequence. And, where decisions carry real weight. They impact humanity. They impact the communities that they reside in. And it's coming back to that place of stabilizing their inner architecture of leadership so that clarity, discernment, and that coherence can really remain, intact under pressure, and that we're leading from a place that is healed. And as leaders heal, they also heal the communities that they impact, because the way that they carry themselves and how that transcends into the organizations and the cultures that they create and that they cultivate. So that's a really, important embodiment of what I do.
When we talk about healing and leadership and you now being on a global context, how do you think that these small conversations, whether it be with one leader or a group of leaders, can serve as a greater impact juxtaposed to where we might see splinters of nationalism or people being religious conscious, or we're talking about a global consciousness. And what do you see global consciousness looking like when it's working properly?
Can you hear me okay, NaRon? Sorry, it keeps giving me pop-up signs
Mhm.
here. Yeah, so I think there's a difference, when we want to bring religious structure into consciousness. Consciousness isn't about religious structure. Consciousness is about
Mhm.
our own self-awareness and our own, God seed, like conscious seed. It has nothing to do with the religious entities and the structures, yet it is all obviously intertwined as we live on the earth plane. And we do have religious structures, just like we have different business models, there's different types of leadership. At the end of the day, in reality, consciousness is bringing back the self-awareness of the self, and not, asking somebody else to be the change when we are not looking to calibrate ourselves in integrity and we're not looking to lead in integrity. So we can have a difference of opinion, we can have a difference of perspective, and we can operate from those pieces, but we also need to have discernment that there can be multiple truths that coexist as ones, and we don't always necessarily have to be right. And that is a huge thing when we are calibrated in a world that is based on intellectual ego and not spiritual ego. Spiritual ego has its place
Mhm.
as well, but when we're coming from this place that we are moving in directions that threaten the livelihood of what we have known to be true for, you know, since childhood or since, inception, all of these pieces start to compound. And how do we actually stay in a place that allows other people's perspectives to live in the same, obviously we live on earth, it's a very, dualized polarity place, and that is the beauty of earth. We've come here to experience that in our multidimensional self. But there also comes a place where we also have self-awareness, that we can respect others' thoughts and opinions. Doesn't mean that their truth is our truth, but it means that we can operate from a place of mutuality where we can come into cohesiveness and agree to disagree and honor somebody else's perception and perspective, and allow that to open our own perception without being it narrow, that, this can only be the only way forward, or this can be the only truth that is in front of me, when in reality that is false.
I muted your mic because it keep echoing on my end. So when you answer back, you can just hit unmute it, and then this is I'm so listen, let's dive deep in the term that you phrase, like courageous conversations. What does a courageous conversation look and sound like if you and I was to have that type of dialogue? There you go.
Absolutely. And, courageous conversations are a critical part of life. And a lot of the times we fear having those conversations because we fear confrontation. And not everybody fears confrontation, but a lot of it is about a fear of confrontation, fear of a difference of opinion, fear of acceptance of a difference of opinion. So when we're having courageous conversations with somebody, it's always comes back to, let's bring it back to the boundaries that we're structuring. Where was there maybe a breach of a boundary? Maybe was there a non-negotiable that wasn't respected, instead of it coming as a personalized or an intimate attack when somebody is just trying to express themselves. But if we don't have emotional regulation, or if we don't regulate the room, then naturally what happens is that emotional instability is created. And then, where we can feel attacked, we can feel that the conversation isn't in alignment, and we can have a lot of resistance, and we can get very defensive because that is part of our natural protective mechanisms. But how do we actually diffuse that, and how do we actually honor somebody else, and actually being able to hold the space to actually hear what they have to say and how it is impacting them, and where is it coinciding with their value system? Where is it coinciding with the belief structure? Because at the end of the day, that is where it is rooted. It's always rooted within a belief structure, within a belief system, because if it wasn't, then it wouldn't come to fruition. We wouldn't have no activation around it or no triggering around it. So how do we bring that back into emotional regulation? So if I'm having a conversation, I'm coming from a conversation that I feel a certain way, but also being able to regulate my own emotional body before even entering into the conversation. And that can be really challenging when it's something that feels a little bit personal. If I am a leader and I made a decision and there's an aftermath after that, what does that look like, and how will that space be held, and what accountability and awareness do I need to take before I enter that space? And that is, the mindset shift that we need to be able to expand into and to open into, so that we can actually hear and listen. So that somebody who is sharing something, that they feel seen, that they feel valued, and that they feel understood. And that is a differentiation when we're having those courageous conversations. Is we can have emotionality behind it, but what are we actually arguing about, or what are we disagreeing about? Where is there separation? Where is there divisiveness? And why is that there? And what belief structure is it threatening for me to actually feel the emotionality, or, the activation within the emotional body?
We have so many people that they may be architecturally decapitated inwardly, but they still hold leadership position. It could have been earned. It could have been because of their financial status. It could have been whatever number of reasons. And historically, we've seen where people come in with great intentions. They take over countries and they come in with great intentions and they make all the promises, and then something, because of the bankruptcy or because of the abandonment internally, they turn into something other. How do you find a commonality or find a common ground to help them start putting pieces together through conversation or through work? Or what are some of the things that you lean into to help someone if they're struggling in the area of becoming architecturally sound internally?
Absolutely. And there's always going to be nuances in leadership that are always going to be mirrored reflections of how we operate internally and what we are choosing and willing to meet internally. And if I choose not to deal with a childhood wound, or, a wound that happened even when I was in my mother's womb, all of these things are all pivotal pieces about being a leader. And not all leaders on, on our earth plane are in a place that they want to have self-awareness, or that they are looking to integrate into their own healing process. And that's not for us to own either. We can't have accountability, we don't have ownership, and we don't have control of how somebody else's state of being is. But when somebody is coming to us and, they've come here to have great intention, and they have great purpose to serve in a leadership capacity, and they want to be a servient leader, where are they meeting resistance within themselves? Where are they not acknowledging their own inner truth and their own inner awareness? And where are they operating from somebody else's external perspective, or their own external perspective of what leadership looks like and what it should feel like? So when we are, calibrating, and we're making decisions that don't feel in the congruency, and we don't feel 100% in alignment, and we can't rest our hat on it, and we don't have inner peace when we're making those decisions, then the decision is out of alignment with all of our being. There's something that is nudging us, our intuitive intelligence is nudging us, and it's saying, hey, listen here. Something isn't aligned, something isn't right. What do you need to excavate? What do you need to have deeper discovery within yourself? And that fundamental piece is what's rooted here, what's rooted in the belief structure that you think that, you can lay off, let's say thousands of people and not have any repercussion for the lives that you're impacting. Well, what is the belief structure tied to that? That leadership isn't personal. All of these pieces start coming into that congruency where you start seeing, okay, where is there actually disconnection with myself and the leadership that I am? A lot of times, leadership, if it's more traditional leadership, they have this ideology that it has to be a certain way, that it has to be about the bottom line before it is about the people. But in reality, the people are the culture, and the culture is the business that you're that you're curating and that you're creating. So actually, how do we come back to the fundamentals that you are touching people's lives and you're impacting people's lives? And how does that resonate with you? And what are you being mirrored in your leadership where you need to actually go a little bit more inwardly, and you need to actually have more self-reflection and more introspection before you make decisions?
Well, well, some would say that, all right, so you have all of these good ideas. They sound like just ideas, and that you're able to articulate them. But what gives you the cachet to go out and teach leaders? Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you've not just developed your style, but how you got where we are today.
Absolutely. And, you know, we can say all the right things, but if we don't do the right things, there's a lack of integrity within our own self-leadership. And for me, it's really important that the leader that I express to you today is the leader that I live by in every now moment of how I lead, my successful practice, how I lead other businesses when I do consulting or when I do stewardship with them. So a lot of this is through my own personal experience of what I've experienced in leadership. What has been the polarization of the leader that I do not want to become, and what is the leadership that I actually want to embody, and what cultural dynamics do I want to create within my own empire, my own entity, and my own legacy that I actually want to abide by within myself and live, in the congruency of myself. So, when we go through leadership tenures and we have a career, we also see and we witness how other leaders, when we're networking with other leaders, and how we interconnect in partnerships and through collective, discussions. So when we are, for me, my own personal leadership is every time, like I said, that I alluded to at the beginning, is every near-death experience that I have moved through has also brought me deeper within myself to actually take accountability for myself. So when I lead that with other people, it's coming from a place that not what I've experienced myself, because everyone's experiences will be different. What you go through on your leadership path will be different than what I do. And leadership doesn't just mean in business, it means in our own self-leadership and our own self-mastery of the self. And what you move through and the experiences that you have evolved from, and where you grow from, and where you expand from, are going to be wildly different than mine, but there's still a commonality of self-awareness, self-reflection, self-introspection, self-action. All of these things come into play. So when we're leading from this place and when we're doing stewardship, it's really important that I don't speak from a place that I haven't walked, that I haven't earned myself within myself. So when I'm coming into that stewardship space, that is the embodiment that I hold. I know what I've been through. I know what I've moved through. If it comes from a personal venture, if it comes from, a career or something in, my experience of expertise, that is how I embody that stewardship. So I've walked through my own healing path. I've done all the healing. I started with my mindset. I started with, the intellectual body. I moved into the emotional body. I moved into the physical body, and I moved into the spiritual and the energetics. So to be able to speak from that place is to have gained that wisdom within myself so that I can, steward it in those spaces of those retreats or through one-on-one consultations.
Most people would say, all right, I don't want to categorize most people, but a lot of people, when they have traumatic experiences and they go through something, they use it as a crutch to not find the true deeper meaning. But energetically and spiritually, your experiences took you into a journey where you are now. How did that personal transition come? You don't have to get into what you went through, but how was that personal transition where you could have sat on the sideline and moped and said, "Oh, my life," but instead you built a business around your personal story?
Absolutely. And I love that question, Ron, because that brings the intimacy of who we are as people, and that we all go through things and we all have trials and tribulations, and nothing is in comparison or comparable. And for me, my childhood was okay, but I had an absent father. So there's a lot of things that had perpetuated for my own self worth and my own self value. And, it's not that was the mastery of the lesson, of the embodiment that I needed to learn in this lesson. And I'm very cognizant of that was part of my karmic lessons and my own karmic teachings within my own self-mastery. That was a place where I always had this knowingness when I was little. I always had an interconnectedness with the energetic realms when I was little. I always felt very connected to the angels when I was little. I would hear messages of like inspiration and positivity and to keep moving forward. And I knew that I was going to have a global impact when I was very young. I just didn't know what that was going to, embody, or what that was going to entail. And as I went through life, I went through some really tumultuous relationships that mirrored to me where I lacked self-love, self-integrity, and self-acceptance. And those relationships cultivated for me to go deeper within myself. And after that, I had a very unhealthy marriage, and I ended up leaving with my children, and I experienced my first near-death experience. And that was a profound awakening moment for me. I was having little moments of awakening before that were leading up to that, but that was like an earth shatterer awakening where I was, in a career path. I was working as an executive. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I went to school the way that I was supposed to. Like, I did everything that I was told that I should and what I was supposed to be doing. But in reality, I wasn't happy and I wasn't fulfilled and I wasn't at peace with myself. And I didn't feel like I was serving in the way that I envisioned that I was going to serve when I was very young. And that brought me into a really deep place where I really need to have really deep introspection and self-reflection of who am I? What am I doing? Are the relationships that are around me supporting me? Are they adding value? Are they detracting from me? There was a lot of mastery that had to go into that, of just my own self-awareness to actually make shifts and to pivot my life the way that I did. And then I experienced my second near-death experience. And I had 4 near-death experiences in a span of 2 years. So you can imagine how traumatic to the body that was. And a lot of soul healing had to happen, and energetic healing needed to happen in order for me to feel congruent and fully embodied, and to bring all of those pieces and bring all my power back to myself so that I was operating from that place. And that was like a decade of a path that I really had to learn how to heal within and master myself, how to shift, my energetic disposition to not have another near-death experience. Like, what did I need? What was I not acknowledging? What was I not aware of? And what was I not listening to within myself that was perpetuating these continual near-death experiences for me to awaken further?
I'm glad that we're going to end the conversation here on this note, but I'm glad that you explain your path from the childhood through everything. Because what I teach adults, when I teach the seniors, we use the imagination to remember. But if I'm teaching a kid, a youth, a young adult, I'm using the imagination to project. Because all of what we go through and all of what we embody, and it took me a long time to understand, we're remembering. Rather, we're remembering movements that we did as children, remembering interactions with energy when we were kids. We're living in a state of reminding the body what we might have forgotten because of our life experiences, because of our near-death experiences, because of the divorce, and all these things play as excuses, but they don't just play as excuses, they play as roadblocks. And these roadblocks are put there so that you can't find your way to be impactful. Some people get stuck in the roadblock. And this is what I really want to end our conversation, encouraging somebody how to get past these roadblocks. what can they do as parents, leaders in their home, leaders in their community to help them overcome the roadblock that actually lies within.
Absolutely. And you touched on something really beautiful here because in reality, our entire life is a journey of remembrance, a journey of remembering who we innately are within ourselves. And that is the light and the love of who we actually are and what we've came here to experience. And if anyone has truly, meditated or went into astral body, they know that we are surrounded by a field, and we are a field of unconditional love and purity and peace. So when we are going through life and we're always going to have roadblocks. We're always going to have a pothole. We're always going to have a hill that we have to climb, and we're always going to have a hill that we have to go down. That is the beauty of life. That is the road of life. And we can choose. Everything in reality of our life is a choice. We can choose to stay in a state of sufferance, or we can choose to take what we are being shown and we can alchemize that, and we can bring that into our life, and we can learn, and we can grow, and we can expand from there. For every experience that I have moved through, I could have sat, I've lost a baby. I could have sat on the couch. I could have, stayed in a state of grief. And grief is a really important thing. And feeling the emotional body is absolutely crucial. But it's also important that we're able to process and that we can move through it, and that we can actually move beyond that, even though there can be a piece that we're always going to be in a state of remembrance of, who has impacted our life, what has come into our life. But in reality, we have to choose to continuously move forward. We can't go on a highway and drive in reverse and expect not, a massive collision to happen because of that. We have to be able to keep moving forward, and we have to keep putting that initiative forward, and we have to allow ourselves to feel what is meant to be felt so that we can release it. If we're blocked, if we feel like, all we're seeing is darkness, or what we feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, we have to just keep moving forward, because the light will be there. We just have to keep inching towards it. And it's just about movement and momentum. And as soon as we stay stagnant, that is when we're consciously making a choice, or subconsciously making a choice, that we are going to stay in that state of sufferance.
There you have it, everybody. There you have it, everybody. I told you that we sit you at the feet of the masters, and we have conversations to help you evolve your life. And you just got a masterclass on what leadership, even in this day and time, looks like. We don't ask you for Cash App, Venmos, or any of those things, but we do ask you for a couple of things. We ask that you would get into the sphere of our guests. All of Roxanne's information is in the description. Go to the website, go to whatever social handles may be there for us to get into the orbit where she shares, and she leads not just with love, but she leads with value. These are important conversations, especially when you feel that there's a huge void in leadership, when you can become the leader in your family and in your community. And secondly, we ask that you hit subscribe and share. Your likes, your subscriptions, your shares help these conversations get into the ears of the people that need to hear them. We are sharing great, impactful, life-changing stories, and we're also leading with value and information. And finally, Victory Builders is now out. Victory Builders is our all-in-one platform. We've sat down and built this platform for you, the entrepreneur, the thought leader, who is scattered in, you have MailChimp over here, your CRM over there, your builder over here, and all these payments are coming out at various times. We've created a platform where it's all-in-one payment. And just because it's all-in-one doesn't mean that we've cheapened what we do. We've actually given you more. We don't charge fees for taking swipes through the platform. We don't charge any of those things. We try to look out. My goal was to be a conscious leader and look out for those who was probably going through some of the similar things that I was going through early on in business. And we created this platform. Awakening I Am is out. Our book, again, in the description. Enjoy the rest of your day. Walk in victory. Peace.